This is the Positive EQ Perspective, where you'll find a more positive outlook on life by developing your emotional intelligence. My name is Kirsty Gwynn. I'm a coaching psychologist and speaker, and I'm passionate about helping people to experience more calm, contentment, and joy every day. Resilience is just one of my favorite topics to talk about. It is such a passion of mine. In fact, it's really the whole idea of what enables us to hold on to both ourselves and our sense of hope for the future, right, throughout a difficult time. That really inspired me to study positive psychology in the first place, right? I just love this idea of resilience. I love everything it stands for, and I'm really passionate about all the research that comes out of it too. Over the last 20 years or so, with the advent of positive psychology, which has really looked at these kind of the more, let's say, positive framing side of the our psychological experience and looking at what makes us resilient, right? That's one of the primary questions that psychology, positive psychology specifically, has been looking at in the last 20 years, right? What helps us to maintain high well-being, and what actually makes us resilient. And the research, I promise you, is just fascinating, so I can't wait to dive into that. But before we do so, I wanted to share with you some really exciting news as well. I recently connected with a group of really inspirational business owners in the field of health and well-being, and I invited them to speak I invited them to really say, is anyone interested in coming on as a guest on my podcast? And I was just completely blown away that I had almost 50 people kind of say that they would like to share their information with you on the Positive EQ Perspective podcast. And so we have lots of exciting things to come. I know that I am so excited to learn from these amazing people, and I can't wait for them to share their knowledge with you. And that's just something to look forward to that I wanted to share with you today. I wanted to say, before we go ahead and get started, I probably sound a little clogged up. I have a cold at the moment, unfortunately, but I didn't want to miss this. But let's turn our attention to this topic of resilience. What exactly is resilience? You may have heard this phrase before of bounce back, right? That resilience is this ability to bounce back after encountering a difficult time. And I absolutely love that definition. And another definition that I personally really like is resilience as the ability to recover quickly after one of life's inevitable challenges, or maybe many challenges at a time. What I love about both these definitions, bouncing back and the ability to recover quickly, is that they contain within them a metaphor. They're not saying we never get hurt or we never fall down, or it's just being strong or not being affected by things. Feeling disappointed, feeling hurt, heartbroken, hopeless at times, it's part of the human experience, and all people experience these feelings. And when it comes down to resilience, what we're really looking at is not how do we become invincible. That would be great, but it's just not realistic, as I know you already know. It comes down to resilience is really, how do I recover from that? How do I move forward, right? How can I move forward after a difficult experience without feeling like I'm stuck in the past, or without feeling that it's weighing me down forever? And I know that a lot of coaching clients who come to me, it's kind of one of the things that people often say is, I want to move forward, right? I feel like I'm not able to move forward, and that's what I help people to do. So understanding what resilience looks like at a practical level, right? What does that mean that we do in order to be more resilient? Knowing that has completely changed my own life and given me a sense of peace in the midst of a difficult time that I didn't have before. So once I knew what resilient people were doing to help themselves recover, and this from the research, I started to feel a much greater sense of control even in the midst of one of life's challenges. And it's not that I could suddenly control or change the situation, because as you know, a lot of the time things just go wrong, and there may genuinely be nothing we can do about a specific situation, but that I knew what to do to help myself cope. I knew what the path to recovery looked like, and I knew that there were specific steps I could take to move myself forward. And that's something that I didn't have before I had learned this. And so those challenges, when I would encounter them, life's difficulties, they'd really knock me off course. They would really have a very overwhelming effect. I'd feel very out of control and helpless on top of all the other difficult feelings I was maybe feeling about the specific situation. And I remember, a specific kind of shift that happened when I started practicing resilience in a really active way, that, just almost a sense of self-trust developing. Like, I had this confidence that I'm gonna feel better about this one day. I'm gonna be able to cope with it. I'm gonna be able to move forward. I know what to do. And I really feel like such a big proportion of what affects us when things go wrong, so much is, yes, about the situation itself. There are big feelings there, but that additional sense of like helplessness and I don't know how to cope and it's too hard to deal with is such a big proportion of that. And being able to resolve that by learning how, to actually boost my resilience in a very proactive, practical, I love practical way, has just been nothing short of life-changing, right? So that's what we're going to talk about today. That's what I love to offer my clients, and that's what I want to talk about in today's episode. So the topic, right? What are resilient people doing? So the first thing that they're doing can actually seem a little counterintuitive, and I remember finding it very counterintuitive. So we might be tempted to think that we're going to cope better if we kind of keep going, right? Well, the story says in Finding Nemo, just keep swimming. Or maybe we tell ourselves to just be strong or just stay positive. Interestingly, research actually shows that this prolongs our struggle and prevents us from bouncing back. Right? So true resilience requires that we allow ourselves to feel the emotional pain that we're in so that we can move through it and out the other side. I like to think of this as like, a wave kind of going in and going out the other side. If we, on the contrary, dismiss our feelings or try and ignore them, or we put on a brave face, we don't truly process them, and they actually build up, right? Literally in that brain's protective system, because we're not processing that emotion. We're actually not moving through. We're not letting it go, and it starts to build up. That part of the brain gets more and more activated. We're going to see numerous symptoms with that. We're starting to feel more numb. We're starting to feel more negative in our mindset, more and more stressed, and eventually they build up to such a point that maybe we see a major deterioration in our mental health, or we experience a burnout, right? So the first way to be resilient, to help yourself to bounce back, is that really counterintuitive thing of allowing yourself to feel that hurt for a while, right? So that ultimately you have moved through it, and then we can move forward. This doesn't mean kind of wallowing in it, right? It just means that we acknowledge our feelings the way that we would for a friend. It's kind of like saying to yourself, this feels really hard, right? And it's understandable that it feels hard because I invested a lot in that. Or I'm really devastated about this, right? Because it is, I never saw it coming, right? Or this feels like such a major loss to me. Or my life has changed so much as a result of this. It's relevant whether the situation is something like a disappointment, right? Or an everyday stressor. And it's relevant when it comes to something like grief that can feel really huge, right? And a lot of the time, it's different things feel bigger, right? It's not always about objectively how the situation is. It's about allowing ourselves to feel whatever comes up for us, not beating ourselves up for those feelings. And that will actually help you to move more quickly through the recovery process. So whenever I hear about this idea of resilience, it's like, oh, it's just being strong. I think it's a really toxic idea that we've got there. True resilience is actually, I think, takes immense courage to be vulnerable so that we can, in the long term, not be held back when we are just, putting on a brave face, but not truly having the courage to, and it takes a lot of courage to feel our feelings so that we process them, we can move forward. Ultimately, in the long term, we're going to see our resilience suffer as a result. Right, so really making sure that you, or trying to take some steps to allow yourself to acknowledge those feelings and to feel them, right, for at least a while. And then the second thing that resilient people are doing is they're taking an active role in their recovery. When we are hurting, I think it's really human to just have this kind of sense of inertia, right? Just to sit in those feelings, to wallow in them, to feel really stuck in them. And we don't feel particularly motivated, if motivated at all, I would say, depending what the emotion is, it's usually that we're just like, oh, I don't feel like doing anything right now. And we kind of just think, oh, I just gotta wait for this to pass, maybe. Right? And that's, I think, one of the reasons that we also numb it, because we're like, well, there's nothing I can do to actually help myself recover. But resilient people have specific things that they do in order to feel better. And this is the research by Dr. Barbara Fredrickson, and that in order to be resilient, we need to actually seek out the things that help ourselves feel better and help ourselves to recover. So these might be, coping mechanisms that we've learned and that we find personally useful. It might be taking time out for yourself to nurture yourself, to show yourself kindness, whatever that looks like. Do things that you enjoy. It might be seeking out people that we feel we can talk to, or expressing our feelings through journaling. Right? Chances are you can identify something that you already do to make yourself feel better when you're struggling. Right? Some of these things might be healthy things. And when I use this word healthy, I mean you feel like they're working for you in the long term, right? There are things that you feel, well, this is something that serves me. And some other things you might think, well, that's not actually in the long run, I'm using that as a coping mechanism, but afterwards I feel really guilty about it, or it's actually a bad habit, and it's actually not working for me, right? The key difference is that when we shift into a resilient frame of mind, we're really being proactive. We're deciding up front, when I'm in a moment of struggle or shame or I'm hurting, these are the things I'm going to do to support myself through that time. It's really pausing to ask yourself, what do I need in this moment? What would make me feel better right now? This is what we usually do for our friends and family, right? For our loved ones, because we know it makes them feel better, right? But how often do we not offer that to ourselves? So it's now about offering this to ourselves as a way to say, I'm going to be an active participant in my own recovery. I'm going to help myself to bounce back. Even that deciding what I'm going to do up front, I think is really key, because of that demotivation that comes when we're struggling, right? If we already have our things that we've decided, we can execute them, right? We can go and we can do them. But when we're in that struggle to say, well, what can I do to make myself feel better? It's our attention is really narrowed. When we're in a state of negative emotion, we're going to see much fewer options. It's going to be hard to identify things that make us feel better. Whereas if we decide up front, we've given ourselves an advantage, right? Some good planning when it comes to coping and resilience. When you are taking an active role in your recovery in this way, you'll find that you'll move through difficult times more quickly, and you'll feel better able to cope, more confident that you can cope. And in essence, you'll be more resilient. Resilience is something that we can learn, right? And you can start right now by acknowledging your feelings and then being an active participant in your own recovery. Well, that's it for me. Thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. Every subscriber counts, and it helps this information to reach more people. Thank you, and I'll see you next week on the Positive EQ Perspective. If you're looking to calm negative thoughts, accept yourself, and live joyfully, then you need my free roadmap to overcome negative thinking. You'll discover 7 steps to follow, as well as 3 mistakes most people make trying to improve their mindset and life that only make things worse. Visit positiveeq.com/free. That's positiveeq.com/free.